The rain hammered against the windshield of Sarah Chen's beat-up Honda as she sat in the parking lot of Jefferson High School, watching groups of people hurry toward the gymnasium entrance. 10 years. 10 years since she'd walked these halls as a scrawny, awkward teenager who jumped at her own shadow. 10 years since she'd graduated and sworn she'd never look back. Her reflection stared back at her from the rearview mirror. Short black hair, regulation cut, a thin scar running from her left temple to her jawline courtesy of shrapnel from a Vorthan plasma grenade, and eyes that had seen things no human should have to see. The nervous 17-year-old who used to hide in bathroom stalls during lunch was gone, replaced by someone who had held the line at Kepler Station when the alien invasion fleet thought humanity would roll over and die. A message from her old friend Maya. "Where are you? The reunion started 20 minutes ago. Please tell me you didn't chicken out. JF." If only Maya knew that Sarah had stared down a Vorthan destroyer-class bioship without flinching, or that she'd earned the Terran Cross of Valor for her actions during the siege of New Geneva. But Maya didn't know about any of that. As far as everyone from Jefferson High was concerned, Sarah Chen had simply disappeared after graduation, vanishing into obscurity like so many other unremarkable students. The Terran Defense Force had worked hard to keep the 3-year war with the Vorthan Collective under wraps, officially dismissing it as a series of exploration accidents and deep space technical failures. Only a select few knew that humanity had fought for its very survival against an alien empire that had conquered 17 other species before setting their sights on Earth. Sarah pulled her leather jacket tighter and stepped out into the rain. The familiar brick facade of Jefferson High loomed before her, decorated with balloons and a banner reading Class of 2016, 10-Year Reunion. Students who had once filled these halls were now adults, and many would have families, careers, normal lives unburdened by the weight of keeping an entire species safe from extinction. As she approached the entrance, memories flooded back unbidden. The time Jessica Morrison had shoved her into a locker so hard she'd cracked a rib. The day Brad Kowalski had cornered her after gym class and threatened to post embarrassing photos online unless she did his homework. The countless moments of casual cruelty that had made her teenage years a living nightmare. The worst part hadn't been the physical bullying, it had been the way they made her feel like she was nothing, like she didn't deserve to exist in their world. They'd systematically destroyed her confidence, convinced her she was weak, worthless, invisible. If only they knew what that worthless girl had accomplished. Sarah pushed through the double doors into the familiar hallway lined with trophy cases and faded motivational posters. The sound of music and laughter echoed from the gymnasium. She paused at a display case containing photos from her graduating class, her eyes finding her own awkward senior portrait. Thick glasses, nervous smile, hair hanging in front of her face like a shield. Holy shit, is that Sarah Chen? Brad Kowalski stood behind her looking exactly like she'd expected. Soft around the middle, hairline receding, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the fact that his high school athletic peak was long behind him. His eyes held the same cruel glint she remembered, though now tempered with the smugness of someone who thought success was measured solely in dollar signs. Brad. She kept her voice neutral, falling back on the discipline that had gotten her through countless military briefings where showing emotion could be fatal. Wow, you look different. His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, taking in the lean muscle definition visible beneath her dark sweater, the confident way she carried herself. I heard you joined the military or something. Navy? Space Force. The lie came easily. The Terran Defense Force was technically a branch of the Space Force, and it was simpler than explaining the truth. Brad laughed, the same condescending sound that used to make her want to disappear. Space Force? Seriously? What do? Watch satellites all day? Before she could respond, another voice cut through the conversation. Brad Kowalski, still as charming as ever, I see. Maya Rodriguez appeared at Sarah's side like a guardian angel, her dark eyes flashing with the same fierce loyalty that had made their unlikely friendship survive even when Sarah couldn't defend herself. Maya had been one of the popular kids, but she'd never participated in the cruelty, and she'd often stepped in when things went too far. Maya. Brad's smile became forced. Good to see you. I was just catching up with our little Sarah here. Space Force, can you believe it? Actually, I can. Maya's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there in high school. Some people grow up, Brad. They find their courage, discover what they're really capable of. Others, she looked him up and down dismissively. Others peak in high school and spend the rest of their lives trying to relive their glory days. Brad's face reddened, but before he could respond, Maya had linked her arm through Sarah's and was guiding her toward the gymnasium. Come on, there are people who actually want to see you. As they walked away, Sarah could feel Brad's glare burning into her back. Some things never changed. The gymnasium had been transformed with twinkling lights and draped fabric, though nothing could quite disguise the lingering smell of adolescent sweat and industrial floor cleaner that permeated every school building. Round tables filled the space, and a DJ played a mix of music from their high school years alongside current hits. How are you really doing? Maya asked as they found seats at a table near the back. I mean, really, you look incredible, by the way. Military life must agree with you. Sarah smiled, the first genuine expression she'd allowed herself since arriving. Maya had always been perceptive. I'm good. Different, but good. It's been an interesting decade, isn't it? I bet. You just vanished after graduation. No social media, no contact. I worried about you. The guilt hit Sarah harder than she'd expected. Maya had been the one bright spot in her high school experience, the person who'd shown her that not everyone was cruel, that friendship could exist without exploitation. And Sarah had abandoned her without explanation, unable to tell her that she'd been recruited into a Black Ops program that didn't officially exist. I'm sorry, Sarah said quietly. I wanted to stay in touch, but my job requires a certain level of isolation, security clearances, you know. It wasn't entirely a lie. The TDF did require complete separation from civilian contacts during active service, though that restriction had been lifted 6 months ago when the Vorthon threat was officially neutralized. Well, you're here now, Maya said, squeezing her hand. That's what matters. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself relaxing despite her reservations. Many of her former classmates had indeed grown up, leaving behind the casual cruelty of adolescence for the more complex realities of adult life. Some approached her with genuine curiosity about her military service, and she deflected with practiced ease, sharing sanitized stories about training exercises and classified operations. It was almost easy to pretend she was just another veteran, someone who'd served their country in conventional ways rather than literally saving humanity from extinction. Then Jessica Morrison appeared at their table. Jessica had been the queen bee of Jefferson High's social hierarchy, beautiful and popular and absolutely ruthless to anyone she deemed beneath her notice. She'd made Sarah's life particularly miserable, seeming to take personal pleasure in finding new ways to humiliate her. Now Jessica looked like a woman who'd lived hard and fast. Her once perfect blonde hair showed dark roots, her makeup couldn't quite hide the lines of stress around her eyes, and her dress was just a little too tight, trying too hard to recapture something that was gone. Sarah Chin, Jessica said, her voice carrying the same false sweetness that had once preceded some of Sarah's worst high school memories. I can't believe you actually came. The table went quiet. Maya tensed beside her, ready to intervene, but Sarah held up a subtle hand. She could handle this. Jessica. Sarah's voice remained calm, controlled. You look exactly like I expected. The backhanded compliment hit its mark. Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. I heard you joined the Space Force. That's so... I always said you'd end up doing something weird. Weird is one way to put it, Sarah agreed mildly. I mean, it's not like it's a real military branch, right? It's just satellites and computer stuff. Very safe. Jessica's tone made it clear she considered this a coward's path. Not like my ex-husband, he was a Marine. Real combat, you know? Jessica was trying to diminish her service, trying to make her feel small and worthless, just like she had in high school. The old Sarah would have shrunk away, accepting the verbal assault because she believed she deserved it. But the old Sarah had never held a plasma rifle while Vorthan shock troops poured through a breach in Kepler Station's hull. The old Sarah had never watched her squad mates die to buy humanity time to mount a defense. The old Sarah had never looked a 10-foot-tall alien predator in its compound eyes and pulled the trigger without hesitation. You know what, Jessica? Sarah stood slowly, her movement predatory and controlled. You're absolutely right. My service was very different from a Marine's. The entire table was watching now, sensing the shift in energy even if they didn't understand what was happening. Marines fight human enemies, Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. Human enemies with human weapons, human tactics, human limitations. They fight wars where the worst thing that can happen is death. She leaned forward slightly, and Jessica instinctively took a step back. There was something in Sarah's eyes now, something that spoke of violence and horror and absolute certainty. I've fought things that would make your worst nightmares seem like children's bedtime stories. I've seen planets stripped of all life, entire species reduced to component atoms for fuel. I've held the line against odds that would make any sane person curl up in a corner and wait to die. The gymnasium around them seemed to fade away as Sarah spoke, her voice carrying the weight of classified horrors that no civilian would ever truly understand. So yes, Jessica, my service was different. It was the kind of service where safe isn't an option, where every day you wake up knowing that if you fail, everything you've ever loved disappears forever. It was the kind of service where weak, worthless little girls like me learn to become the thing that stands between civilization and annihilation. Jessica had gone pale, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The rest of the table stared at Sarah with a mixture of awe and confusion, not understanding the specifics but recognizing the authenticity of someone who had seen real combat. Sarah straightened, smoothing down her sweater as if nothing had happened. But you're right about one thing. It was very quirky. She turned and walked away, leaving Jessica standing speechless beside the table. Maya hurried to catch up with her. Sarah, what the hell was that about? Maya demanded as they stepped into the hallway. I've never seen you like that before. You looked like you were going to, kill someone. Sarah paused, realizing she'd let too much of her real self show. The Sarah Chen who had earned battlefield promotions and classified commendations wasn't supposed to exist in this world of normal human problems and petty high school drama. I'm sorry, she said finally. I've had enough of people like her. I spent too many years letting them make me feel like nothing. You're different, Maya observed, studying her face. I mean, really, that confidence, the way you carried yourself in there, it's not just military bearing. What exactly did you do in the Space Force? Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Her blood ran cold as she read the message. Priority, Alpha Vertan contact confirmed. All TDF personnel report immediately. I have to go, Sarah said, her mind already shifting into combat mode. Right now. What? Sarah, the reunion's just getting started. Maya, I'm sorry, but I have to leave. Something's come up. Something important. She was already moving toward the exit, her training overriding everything else. Somewhere in space, the Vorthan Collective had made contact again, and that meant humanity was once again in danger. The reunion, Jessica Morrison, all of it seemed like a distant dream compared to the reality of what was coming. As she reached her car, Maya caught up with her one last time. Will I see you again? Maya asked, rain soaking through her dress. Or are you going to disappear for another 10 years? Sarah paused with her hand on the car door. Behind them, the school was warm and bright, full of people living normal lives. I'll be back, she said, though she wasn't sure if it was a promise she could keep. Take care of yourself, Maya. As she drove away from Jefferson High, Sarah Chen left behind the last remnants of the scared, bullied teenager she'd once been. The woman behind the wheel now was a soldier, a guardian, someone who stood between Earth and the dark, between the stars. And somewhere out there, the real war was just beginning again. Sarah's knuckles were white against the steering wheel as she raced through the empty streets toward the classified TDF facility hidden beneath Denver International Airport. The emergency alert had contained minimal information, just the priority code and coordinates that every veteran knew by heart. Priority Alpha meant imminent threat to Earth itself, the kind of situation that had only been called 3 times during the entire Vorthan War. The rain had turned into a downpour, forcing her to slow down despite her urgency. As she drove, fragments of the reunion kept flashing through her mind. Jessica's sneering face, the way the entire table had stared at her after her outburst, Maya's confused questions. She'd blown her cover spectacularly, letting 15 years of military training and combat experience show through the thin veneer of civilian normalcy. But none of that mattered now. If the Vorthans were back, if they'd found some way to circumvent the defensive grid that had cost humanity so much to build, then every petty high school drama became meaningless against the backdrop of species survival. Her secure phone rang as she took the highway exit toward the airport. The caller ID showed only a string of numbers, but she recognized the pattern. Chen, here. Report your ETA to Black Site 7. 15 minutes out, sir? She accelerated, muscle memory taking over as she fell back into the crisp efficiency of military communication. Good. Be advised, this is not a drill. We have confirmed Vorthan's signatures on the edge of the solar system. Multiple contacts, configuration unknown. Sarah's blood ran cold. Multiple contacts meant a fleet, not a single scout ship or probe. The last time they'd detected multiple Vorthan vessels simultaneously, it had been the prelude to the Siege of New Geneva, where humanity had lost 40,000 soldiers in 6 days of fighting.
Any word on deployment order, sir?
Report to Colonel Martinez for briefing. And Shen? The voice paused. Good to have you back. The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the rhythmic sound of windshield wipers. Good to have her back. As if she'd ever really left. The TDF had officially stood down 6 months ago when the last Vorthan stronghold in the Centauri system had been destroyed. But soldiers like Sarah never truly left service. They just waited. She'd tried civilian life for exactly 4 months after demobilization. A small apartment in Phoenix, a job as a security consultant that barely challenged her intellect. Evenings spent staring at walls and trying to figure out how to exist in a world where people worried about credit scores and traffic jams instead of alien invasion fleets. The nightmares hadn't helped. Dreams filled with the screams of dying comrades and the distinctive whine of Vorthan plasma weapons. The reunion invitation had been a desperate attempt to reconnect with her old life, to find some bridge between the terrified teenager she'd been and the soldier she'd become. Instead, she'd discovered that the bridge was burned beyond repair. The moment she'd stood up to Jessica Morrison, she'd revealed the fundamental truth. Sarah Chen could never go back to being a victim. The entrance to Black Site 7 was hidden in plain sight, a maintenance tunnel beneath Terminal C that tourists and travelers passed without a second glance. Sarah's biometric scan was processed instantly, and she found herself descending in a high-speed elevator that plunged nearly 300 feet below ground. The facility hadn't changed much in 6 months. The same sterile corridors lined with blast doors, the same subtle hum of fusion reactors providing power, the same sense of being in a place that existed outside normal reality. But there was an energy in the air now, a tension that spoke of impending action. Personnel moved with purpose through the hallways, and she could hear the distant sound of equipment being prepped for deployment. Colonel Martinez was waiting for her in Briefing Room Alpha, along with a dozen other officers she recognized from the war. Major Kim from the 15th Tactical Squadron, Captain Rodriguez from Engineering, Commander Santos from the Fleet Intelligence Division. Seeing them again was like stepping back in time, as if the last 6 months of attempted civilian life had been nothing but a fever dream. Major Chen. Colonel Martinez stood as she entered, his weathered face showing the strain of too many years fighting an enemy that wasn't supposed to exist. Thank you for responding so quickly, sir. Sarah saluted, falling automatically into military bearing. What's the situation? Martinez gestured to the holographic display that dominated the center of the room. The three-dimensional map showed the solar system, with Earth glowing blue at the center and the familiar orbital paths of the planets traced in gentle curves. But at the very edge of the display, near the orbit of Pluto, a cluster of red dots pulsed ominously. At 13:47 hours today, the Deep Space Monitoring Array detected these contacts decelerating from faster-than-light travel. Initial analysis suggests a Vorthan fleet composition: 3 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and at least 20 escort vessels. Total estimated force strength is approximately 30,000 combatants. The numbers hit Sarah like a physical blow. 30,000. That was larger than any single Vorthan force they'd encountered during the war, including the massive assault fleet that had tried to take Earth directly 3 years ago. "Sir, I thought all Vorthan military assets were accounted for after the Centauri operation." "So did we." Martinez's expression was grim. "Intelligence suggests this fleet may have been in deep space when we destroyed their home system, a reserve force, or perhaps a colonial expansion fleet that only now received word of the war's outcome."
Commander Santos leaned forward, her dark eyes troubled.
"The problem is, we don't know their intentions. They've maintained position at the edge of the system for 6 hours without moving inward or attempting communication. They're just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Unknown. But given their force composition and positioning, we have to assume hostile intent. The President has authorized condition-red protocols, and NATO Command has placed all Earth defense assets on maximum alert. The Vorthan fleet was positioned perfectly to observe Earth's defenses while remaining outside the effective range of the orbital defense platforms. It was a classic reconnaissance formation, the kind used by a commander who wanted to assess enemy capabilities before committing to an assault." "What are our response options?" she asked. "Limited," Martinez admitted. "The defense grid is at 70% capacity. We're still rebuilding from war losses. The fleet is down to 2 heavy cruisers and 8 destroyers, plus supporting vessels. We're outnumbered and outgunned. What about the alien technology we recovered? The Vorthan energy weapons? The FTL drives?" "Still in development, our engineers have made progress, but nothing's ready for field deployment." Martinez paused, studying the faces around the table. "Which brings us to why you're all here." A new hologram materialized above the display, a sleek, predatory shape that Sarah recognized immediately. It was a Vorthan stealth reconnaissance vessel, one of the advanced craft they'd captured intact during the war. "The Oni tech boys have been working on this beauty for 2 years, Martinez continued. "They've retrofitted it with human systems while keeping the Vorthan stealth technology and FTL capability. It's fast, invisible to their sensors, and equipped with enough firepower to take out a destroyer if necessary. A reconnaissance mission. More than that, we need someone to get close to that fleet, assess their capabilities, and if possible, make contact. Find out what they want, why they're here, and what their intentions are toward Earth. And if their intentions are hostile," Martinez's expression hardened, "then we need to know exactly what we're facing so we can mount an effective defense. The war officially ended 6 months ago, Major, but if these Vorthans want to restart it, we need every advantage we can get." Dan stared at the hologram of the stealth ship, her mind racing through the implications. A solo reconnaissance mission deep into enemy territory, piloting alien technology that might fail at any moment, facing an unknown number of hostiles with capabilities they didn't fully understand. It was exactly the kind of impossible odds that the TDF specialized in. "Who's the pilot?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "You are, if you accept the assignment. You have more experience with Vorthan technology than anyone else in the service. And your infiltration record speaks for itself." The room fell silent as everyone waited for her response. Sarah thought about the reunion she'd just left, about Maya's confused questions and Jessica Morrison's petty cruelty. That world seemed impossibly distant now, a place where people could afford to worry about social hierarchies and high school grudges because others stood ready to face the real threats lurking in the darkness between stars. "When do I launch?" she asked. Immediately, the ship is prepped and waiting in Launch Bay 3. Mission parameters are loaded into the navigation system, and Commander Santos will brief you on intelligence protocols during your transit to the launch point. As the meeting broke up and officers hurried to their various assignments, Martinez caught Sarah's arm. "I know we're asking a lot," he said quietly. "You'd barely had time to adjust to civilian life, and now we're throwing you back into the fire. If you need to bow out, no one would blame you." Sarah thought about the question Maya had asked. "Will I see you again?" She'd promised to come back, but that was before she knew about the Vorthan fleet waiting at the edge of the solar system. There was a very real possibility that this mission would be her last, that she'd die alone in the cold darkness between worlds, unknown and unremembered by the people she'd sworn to protect. "Someone has to do it, sir. Might as well be me." 2 hours later, Sarah sat in the pilot's seat of the most advanced spacecraft humanity had ever created, watching the Earth fall away below her as she accelerated toward the outer system. The stealth ship handled like a dream, its Vorthan-designed systems responding to her thoughts almost before she consciously formed them. The human modifications were seamless, integrating perfectly with the alien technology to create something that was more than the sum of its parts. The stars wheeled around her as she adjusted course, setting a trajectory that would bring her within scanning range of the Vorthan fleet while keeping her hidden in the sensor shadow of a small asteroid. The journey would take 18 hours at maximum burn, giving her time to study the intelligence files and prepare for whatever she might find. But as Earth dwindled to a pale blue dot in her rear displays, Sarah's thoughts kept returning to the reunion. In a few hours, her former classmates would be heading home to their normal lives, never knowing how close they'd come to losing everything they'd taken for granted. They'd wake up tomorrow and go to work, worry about mortgages and relationships and all the small dramas that filled ordinary human existence. She envied them that ignorance, even as she knew she could never share it. The scared little girl who'd once hidden from bullies in high school bathrooms was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that the universe was vast and hostile and full of things that wanted humanity dead. But perhaps that transformation had been necessary. Perhaps the universe needed people like her, people who'd been broken down and rebuilt stronger, people who could face the impossible and find a way to win. The comm system chimed with an incoming message from Command. "Blackbird 1, this is Control. You are go for Phase 2 of your mission profile. Maintain radio silence until you reach the observation point." Blackbird 1 going dark.QSA switched off the communication array and settled in for the long journey ahead. Behind her, Earth continued its ancient dance around the sun, blissfully unaware of the alien eyes watching from the darkness. Ahead of her, 30,000 Vorthan warriors waited in ships that could reduce entire planets to radioactive ash, and between them, one human woman piloted a stolen alien craft through the void, carrying the hopes and fears of an entire species into the unknown. It wasn't the life she'd planned as a teenager, but it was the life she'd chosen as an adult. The bullies who'd once made her feel worthless could never have imagined that their victim would grow up to become humanity's first and last line of defense against the dark. As the hours passed and the alien fleet grew larger on her sensors, Sarah Chen prepared to discover whether the war was truly over or if the real battle for Earth's survival was just beginning. The asteroid field at the edge of the solar system was a graveyard of ancient ice and rock, fragments left over from the birth of the solar system that drifted in slow, predictable orbits around the distant sun. Sarah had positioned her stealth ship in the shadow of a particularly large chunk of stone and frozen gases, using its bulk to mask her heat signature while her sensors reached out toward the Vorthan fleet. What she found made her blood run cold. The enemy formation was unlike anything they'd encountered during the war. The ships hung motionless in perfect geometric patterns, their organic curves and bioengineered hulls gleaming with an oily iridescence that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it was their behavior that troubled her most. Vorthan fleets were always in motion during the war, their commanders preferring fluid tactics and unpredictable maneuvers. This formation was static, deliberate, waiting. Sarah's fingers danced over the alien interface, calling up detailed scans of each vessel. The heavy cruisers were massive things, each one nearly 2 kilometers long and bristling with the distinctive spiral towers that housed their primary weapon systems. The destroyers were smaller but more numerous, their sleek forms designed for speed and maneuverability. And scattered throughout the formation were the escort vessels, smaller craft whose purpose remained unclear. But as her scanners penetrated deeper into the fleet's formation, Sarah discovered something that changed everything. The ships weren't just waiting, they were communicating. Streams of data flowed between the vessels in complex patterns, creating a network of information exchange that suggested coordination on a massive scale. She activated the translation protocols that TDF intelligence had developed during the war, watching as the alien communications were slowly decoded and converted into something approaching human language. What emerged was fragmentary, incomplete, but terrifying in its implications. Confirmation of species location verified, planetary defenses assessed at minimal threat level, population centers identified for harvesting operations. Proceed with Phase 3 upon command authorization. Sarah's stomach lurched as she remembered the intelligence reports from the early days of the war, accounts from survivors of Vorthan attacks on human colonies. The aliens didn't just kill their enemies, they processed them, breaking down biological matter into component elements for their bioships and genetic experiments. Entire populations had simply vanished, leaving behind sterile worlds stripped of all organic life. She had to get closer, had to learn more about their intentions and capabilities. The stealth ship's Vorthan technology would allow her to approach within a few thousand kilometers without detection, close enough to perform detailed scans and intercept more communication traffic. Sarah disengaged from the asteroid and began a careful approach to the enemy fleet, using the scattered debris of the outer system as cover. The ship's bio-neural interface responded to her intentions, adjusting course and speed with an intuitive grace that still amazed her after years of experience with alien technology. It was like flying through thought alone, the boundary between pilot and machine blurring until they moved as one entity through the void. As she drew closer to the fleet, more details emerged from her scans. The ships were old, their bio-organic hulls showing signs of extended travel through deep space, but they were also heavily armed, carrying weapon systems that outclassed anything humanity had faced during the war. Worse, she was detecting energy signatures that suggested new technology, systems that the TDF had no defense against. Her communication array detected an incoming transmission, but this one was different. Instead of the coded data streams flowing between the alien vessels, this was a direct, focused beam aimed at her position. Human vessel, you are detected. Maintain position and prepare for communication. The words appeared on her display in perfect, unaccented English, causing Sarah's heart to skip a beat. During the entire war, the Vorthans had never attempted to communicate directly with human forces. Their attacks had been swift, merciless, and without warning or negotiation. The fact that they were speaking to her now suggested something had changed, though whether for better or worse remained unclear. Sarah hesitated, her training warring with the mission requirements. Standard protocols called for immediate withdrawal and reporting to command, but the intelligence value of direct contact with the enemy was immeasurable. After a moment, she activated her own transmission array. This is Major Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. State your intentions regarding Earth and its territories. The response came almost immediately, accompanied by a holographic image that materialized in her cockpit. The figure that appeared was distinctly Vorthan, but unlike any she'd encountered before. Where the aliens she'd fought during the war had been uniformly aggressive and predatory in appearance, this one seemed older, more refined. Its 6 arms moved with deliberate grace, and its compound eyes held an intelligence that was almost disturbingly familiar. I am Fleet Commander Zarthon of the Outer Reach Expedition. Your resistance during the recent conflict was impressive. We did not anticipate such tenacity from what our initial surveys classified as a primitive species. The war is over, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Your home system has been destroyed, your military forces defeated. What do you want here? The alien's mandibles clicked in what she'd learned to recognize as amusement during her interrogations of Vorthan prisoners. The war, as you call it, was merely a preliminary survey, a test of your capabilities and resolve. You passed that test admirably. A test? Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. You killed millions of people. You destroyed entire worlds. Regrettable casualties in the pursuit of knowledge, but necessary. We needed to understand what you were capable of under pressure, how you would respond when faced with extinction.
The data we gathered was fascinating.
The casual way the alien dismissed the death and suffering of the war made Sarah's trigger finger itch, but she forced herself to maintain professional composure. This was intelligence gathering, not combat. And what did you learn? That humanity possesses something unique among the species we have encountered. You call it determination, perhaps, or stubbornness. When faced with certain defeat, instead of surrendering or fleeing, you fight harder. You adapt, innovate, sacrifice yourselves for the survival of others. It is a trait we find useful. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Useful for what? The Vorthan Collective faces a threat far greater than your species could imagine. An enemy that has consumed entire galaxies, leaving only empty space where once billions of civilizations flourished. We have spent millennia searching for allies capable of standing against them. The hologram shifted, and Sarah found herself looking at a star map that stretched far beyond the boundaries of the local galactic cluster. Vast areas were marked in black, regions where stars should have been but showed only empty void. The Devourers, as we have named them, are not merely conquerors. They unmake reality itself, consuming not just matter and energy, but the very fabric of space-time. They turn entire sectors of the universe into nothingness, and they are moving toward our local galactic group. Joe frowned. The black areas were enormous, each one representing the annihilation of billions of star systems. Why are you telling me this? Because we require allies, and your species has proven itself capable of the kind of desperate resistance necessary to slow the Devourer's advance. The test you call the war was designed to evaluate your potential as partners in this larger conflict. Partners? Sarah's voice carried her disbelief. You murdered our people, destroyed our colonies, and now you want us to be partners. War was necessary to measure your capabilities under pressure. Now we offer something more valuable than peace. We offer purpose. Join us in the fight against the true enemy, and your species will survive to see ages you cannot imagine. Refuse, and you will be consumed along with everything else when the Devourers arrive. The communication ended abruptly, leaving Sarah alone in her cockpit with the alien star map still glowing before her. The implications of what she'd learned were staggering. If the Vorthan commander was telling the truth, then the war they'd just survived was nothing compared to what was coming. The universe itself was under threat from something that made the Vorthans look like minor predators. But could she trust anything the aliens said? During the war, they had shown no capacity for mercy or negotiation. Their attacks had been swift and brutal, designed to break human resistance through overwhelming force. The idea that this had all been some kind of test seemed almost impossible to believe. Her sensor display flashed a warning. The Vorthan fleet was moving, the massive vessels breaking from their static formation and beginning to accelerate toward the inner system. Sarah watched in horror as the enemy force gathered speed, their bioorganic drives leaving trails of exotic energy in their wake. She activated her emergency communication array, broadcasting on all frequencies toward Earth. Command, this is Blackbird 1. Priority Alpha transmission. The Vorthan fleet is moving toward Earth. ETE approximately 6 hours at current acceleration. They are requesting alliance against an external threat, but I repeat, they are moving toward Earth. The reply came through layers of static and interference. Blackbird 1, message received. What is your assessment of their intentions? Sarah stared at the alien fleet growing larger on her sensors, weighing everything she'd learned against years of experience fighting these same enemies. Unknown. Command. They claim the war was a test, that they want us as allies against something called the Devourers. but they're approaching in full battle formation. Understood. Return to base immediately for full debriefing. But as Sarah began to plot a course back toward Earth, her sensors detected something new on the edge of her detection range. Ships were emerging from hyperspace, but these weren't Vorthan vessels. The signatures were completely unknown, displaying technology that defied everything humanity understood about physics. The new arrivals were massive, each one dwarfing even the largest Vorthan cruiser. Their hulls seemed to absorb sensor beams, creating gaps in space where matter should have been. And they were moving with a terrible, implacable purpose toward both the Vorthan fleet and Earth itself. Sarah's hands flew over her controls, trying to get clearer readings on the newcomers. What her sensors told her made no sense. The ships registered as both there and not there, existing in a state that violated fundamental laws of reality. But there was no mistaking their intent. They were moving to intercept both the Vorthans and Earth. "Command, this is Blackbird 1. We have a new contact." Multiple unknown vessels, massive tonnage heading toward both the Vorthan fleet and Earth. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. The response was tense, urgent. Can you identify their origin or intent? Sarah watched as the mysterious vessels began to accelerate, their impossible drives bending space around them in ways that hurt to look at directly. "Negative, Command. But based on what the Vorthan commander told me, I think these might be the Devourers." The silence that followed her transmission seemed to stretch for eternity. Finally, Command's voice returned, heavy with the weight of impossible decisions. "Blackbird 1, you are ordered to make contact with the Vorthan fleet. If these Devourers are truly a threat to both our species, we need to explore the possibility of alliance." Sarah felt her world shift beneath her. Hours ago, she'd been sitting in her high school gymnasium, dealing with petty social conflicts and teenage bullies who seemed pathetically insignificant now. She'd thought the worst thing she'd face would be confronting her past, coming to terms with the scared girl she'd once been. Instead, she was about to become humanity's ambassador to its former enemies, negotiating an alliance that could determine the fate of not just Earth. The bullies who'd once made her life miserable had no idea that the girl they'd tormented had grown up to stand at the center of events that would reshape reality itself. She opened a communication channel to the Vorthan fleet, knowing that what she said next could determine whether humanity survived the next 24 hours. "Fleet Commander Zarthon, this is Major Chen. We need to talk at SAZZ to a point in space between Jupiter and Saturn where the gravitational fields of the two giants created a stable zone perfect for diplomatic contact." As she approached, she could see the Vorthan fleet had taken up defensive positions, their bioorganic vessels forming complex geometric patterns that would allow them to concentrate fire on any approaching threat. But it was the sight of Earth's defensive fleet that truly amazed her. In the 6 hours since her warning, humanity had managed to mobilize every available vessel, creating an armada that rivaled anything they'd fielded during the height of the war. The two remaining heavy cruisers hung like steel fortresses among clouds of destroyers and frigates, while orbital defense platforms had been moved to forward positions to maximize their coverage. Most surprising of all was the presence of civilian vessels, cargo haulers, mining ships, even luxury yachts that had been hastily armed and pressed into service. It was a testament to human adaptability that they could transform peaceful merchant vessels into warships in a matter of hours. But Sarah knew it would mean nothing against the reality warping technology of the Devourers. "Blackbird 1, this is Admiral Harrison aboard the TDS Intrepid. You are cleared to dock with the Vorthan command vessel for preliminary negotiations. Be advised, we have multiple weapons locked onto that ship. If this goes badly, you have 30 seconds to clear the area." Bright and airy began her approach to the Vorthan flagship, a massive biocruiser that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. The docking bay that opened a receiver was clearly organic in nature, its edges rippling like the mouth of some vast creature. She suppressed a shudder as her stealth ship settled onto the landing surface, reminding herself that this was diplomacy, not surrender. The airlock cycled with surprising gentleness, and she found herself in a corridor that was both alien and oddly familiar. The walls curved in patterns that suggested growth rather than construction, covered in a substance that felt warm and slightly yielding beneath her boots. Soft bioluminescent panels provided illumination, creating an environment that was more like being inside a living organism than a spacecraft. Fleet Commander Zarthon was waiting for her in what could only be described as a garden. The chamber was filled with alien plants that swayed gently in an artificial breeze, their crystalline leaves chiming softly as they moved. At the center was a pool of clear liquid that reflected the ambient light, creating patterns that seemed to shift and change without any visible cause. Major Chen, the Vorthan commander said, his 6 arms performing an elaborate gesture that she recognized as a greeting from her cultural briefings. I had hoped we would have more time for proper diplomatic protocols, but circumstances force us to speak plainly. Sarah remained standing, her hand resting casually near her sidearm. The unknown vessels? Are they the devourers you mentioned? Yes. Zarton's compound eyes reflected the light from the pool, creating an effect that was almost hypnotic. What you see approaching is merely a scouting force, but even that represents more destructive power than anything our 2 species have ever imagined. He gestured, and a holographic display materialized above the pool, showing the space around Earth in real time. The mysterious vessels were still approaching, their impossible geometries causing distortions in the fabric of space that made them difficult to track visually. How long do we have? Sarah asked. Hours, perhaps less. The devourers do not negotiate or hesitate. They arrive, they consume, they move on. Everything in this system will be unmade unless we can present a united defense. Sarah studied the display, her tactical mind automatically analyzing the approaching threat. The devourer vessels were moving in a formation that suggested they intended to engulf the entire inner system, trapping both Earth and any defending forces in a closing net of destruction. What kind of alliance are you proposing? She asked. Full integration of our fleets under joint command, sharing of all relevant technology, and coordinated defense of this system. In return, we offer you access to weapons and defensive systems that your species would take millennia to develop independently. And after we defeat these devourers, assuming we can, Zarthon's mandibles clicked in what she had learned to recognize as uncertainty. There will be no after, Major Chen. The scout force approaching your system is the vanguard of an invasion that has been consuming galaxies for eons. If we succeed here, we will have earned perhaps decades before they return in force. The goal is not victory, but survival, buying time for our species to grow stronger. The implications of what he was saying hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't a battle that could be won, only delayed. Even if they managed to stop the approaching force, it would only postpone the inevitable. The universe itself was under siege from entities that existed beyond normal understanding. Why Earth, she asked? If these devourers are so powerful, why make a stand here instead of retreating to a more defensible position? They will follow us wherever we run, unmaking star systems behind them until there is nowhere left to flee. But more importantly, because your species has demonstrated something we had thought extinct in the universe, the ability to fight impossible odds and win. Sarah thought about the reunion she'd attended just hours ago, about Jessica Morrison's petty cruelty and the normal human problems that had seemed so important. Those people going about their daily lives had no idea that the continuation of reality itself might depend on the courage of the same species they belonged to. I need to speak with my commanders, Sarah said finally. This decision is beyond my authority. Of course, but be aware that we have very little time. The devourers move faster as they approach their target, bending space to accelerate their advance. We estimate contact in less than 3 hours. Sarah made her way back to her ship, her mind racing with the possibilities and implications of what she'd learned. As she launched and began the journey back to the human fleet, she opened a secure channel to Admiral Harrison. Admiral, this is Blackbird 1. I need to speak with you and the command staff immediately. What the Vorthans are proposing changes everything. Understood, Major. You're clear to land on the Intrepid. We have President Walsh standing by for a secure conference with NATO Command and the UN Security Council. The next hour was a blur of briefings, arguments, and desperate decision-making as Sarah relayed everything she'd learned to the highest levels of human government. The debate was intense and sometimes heated, with some officials arguing that trusting their former enemies was madness while others insisted that facing the devourers alone would be suicide. In the end, it was President Walsh who cut through the arguments with characteristic directness. Major Chen, in your professional opinion, what are our chances of survival if we refuse this alliance? Sarah thought of the reality-warping vessels approaching Earth, of technology that violated the fundamental laws of physics. The Devourer ships register as existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our weapons would be firing at targets that aren't fully present in our reality. And with the Alliance? Unknown, but greater than zero. The Vorthans have experience fighting these entities. They've survived multiple encounters, which means they have some understanding of how to hurt them. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute as the weight of decisions settled on everyone present. Finally, President Walsh spoke again. Very well. Major Chen, you are hereby authorized to negotiate the terms of a temporary alliance with the Vorthan fleet. Make it clear that this cooperation is limited to the immediate threat and does not constitute forgiveness for their previous actions against humanity. Hours ago, the most important decision she'd faced was whether to attend her high school reunion. Now she was being asked to forge an alliance that could determine the fate of human civilization. Understood, Madam President. I'll relay our acceptance to Fleet Commander Zarthon. As she prepared to return to the Vorthan flagship, Admiral Harrison pulled her aside. Major, I know this isn't what you signed up for when you joined the service. If you want to transfer this responsibility to someone else, no one would blame you. Sarah thought about the scared teenager she'd been, the girl who had hidden from bullies and believed she was worthless. That girl would never have imagined standing at the center of events that would reshape human history. But the woman she'd become understood that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who never sought the responsibility. Someone has to do it, sir. Might as well be me. The return journey to the Vorthan ship took on a surreal quality as Sarah watched human and alien vessels maneuvering into joint defensive positions. It was an incredible sight. Ships that had been trying to destroy each other just months ago, now working together against a common threat. The tactical displays showed hundreds of vessels from both fleets creating overlapping fields of fire, their movements coordinated by hastily established communication protocols. But even the combined might of both fleets seemed pitifully small against what was approaching. The Devourer vessels had grown larger on long-range sensors, their reality-distorting effects becoming visible even from thousands of kilometers away. Space itself seemed to ripple around them, stars flickering in and out of existence as they passed. Fleet Commander Zarthon was waiting for her when she arrived, his posture conveying urgency even across the barriers of alien body language. Major Chen, your answer? Humanity accepts your proposal for a temporary alliance against the immediate threat. President Walsh wants it understood that this doesn't erase what happened during the war. Understood and accepted. We have little time to integrate our forces, but I am transmitting tactical data to your fleet commanders now. There are specific targeting solutions that have proven effective against Devourer vessels, though success is far from guaranteed. As Sarah watched the data transfer, she couldn't help but marvel at the irony of the situation. The same alien technology that had nearly destroyed humanity was now being shared freely to save it. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Major, Zarthon continued, there is one more thing you must understand. The Devourers do not simply destroy matter, they unmake it, returning it to a state of non-existence. Any vessel that is caught in their reality distortion fields will not just be destroyed but will never have existed at all. Crews, memories, even records of their construction will vanish from reality. The implications of that statement were terrifying. It meant that anyone who died fighting the Devourers would be erased so completely that they would never be remembered by those who survived. The ultimate sacrifice, not just death, but complete erasure from existence. Then we'd better make sure we win, Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. As the final preparations were completed and both fleets moved into their defensive positions, Sarah found herself thinking one last time about the reunion, about Maya's question of whether she would see her again, about the normal life she was risking to save. If they failed here, not only would Earth be destroyed, but it would be as if it had never existed at all. Maya, Jessica Morrison, everyone she'd ever known would be unmade, their lives and memories erased from reality. But if they succeeded, if this impossible alliance could somehow hold the line against entities that consumed galaxies bathroom stalls, had grown up to save not just her world but the universe itself, it was a thought that would have made her teenage self laugh with disbelief, but the woman she'd become found it oddly fitting. The ultimate confrontation between the victims and the bullies was about to begin, played out on a scale beyond imagination, and this time, Sarah Chen refused to be the one who ran away. The battle began not with explosions or energy beams, but with reality itself starting to unravel. As the Devourer vessels entered the outer edge of Earth's solar system, stars began to flicker and die, not destroyed, but simply ceasing to have ever existed. Space twisted in ways that hurt to perceive directly, creating blind spots in sensor readings where the fundamental laws of physics no longer applied. Sarah piloted her stealth ship through the chaos, serving as a coordination point between the human and Vorthan fleets. The alliance was holding barely, with vessels from both species maintaining their defensive formations despite the terror of facing an enemy that could erase them from existence itself.
All units. This is Admiral Harrison.
Target the geometric centers of the Devourer vessels with quantum torpedoes. According to our Vorthan allies, that's where their reality anchors are most vulnerable. The combined fleet opened fire as one, streams of energy and projectile weapons reaching out toward the approaching nightmares. But watching the weapons' impact was like seeing light swallowed by darkness. The beams and missiles struck their targets and simply vanished, consumed by the reality distortion fields that surrounded each Devourer vessel. "Negative effect on targets," reported Captain Morrison from the destroyer Valkyrie. "Our weapons are having no impact." Sarah switched to the Vorthan communication frequency where Fleet Commander Zarthon was coordinating his own forces. "Commander, our weapons aren't penetrating their defenses. Do you have any other suggestions?" "Continue firing," came the grim reply. "The goal is not to destroy them immediately, but to force them to maintain their defensive fields. Each quantum torpedo they absorb weakens their ability to project reality distortions. Eventually, we may create enough strain to make them vulnerable." It was a war of attrition against entities that consumed galaxies, and the mathematics were not encouraging. But as Sarah watched, she began to notice something the sensors couldn't detect. The lead Devourer vessel was moving more slowly than when it had first appeared, its reality field fluctuating in ways that suggested strain. "Admiral Harrison, this is Blackbird 1. I'm detecting fluctuations in the lead vessel's distortion field. Recommend concentrating all fire on that target." "Understood, Major." "All units target bearing Mark 7-7-4. Full assault pattern." The entire combined fleet turned its attention to the single vessel, pouring everything they had into the space where it existed. Quantum torpedoes from human ships mixed with bioplasma charges from Vorthan vessels, creating a storm of destructive energy that should have been enough to crack a moon. And slowly, impossibly, it began to work. The reality distortions around the lead Devourer ship started to break down, revealing glimpses of the vessel beneath. What they saw defied description. A structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its surface covered in geometric patterns that shifted and changed faster than the eye could follow. It was beautiful and terrifying, a work of art created by an intelligence so alien that looking at it directly caused physical pain. "Target's shields are destabilizing," reported Commander Santos from the intelligence ship Athena. "Whatever that thing is, we're hurting it." But their success came at a cost. 3 human destroyers had ventured too close to the enemy formation and been caught in expanding reality fields. Sarah watched in horror as the vessel simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but erased so completely that the tactical displays couldn't even register where they had been moments before. "All units, maintain minimum safe distance," Admiral Harrison ordered, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "We can't afford to lose ships to those reality fields." The battle continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Time itself seemed distorted near the Devourer vessels, making it impossible to trust chronometers or biological perception. Sarah found herself relying on her training and instincts, flying by feel through space that didn't always obey the normal rules of physics. Then, without warning, the lead Devourer vessel began to collapse in on itself. The reality distortions that had protected it folded inward, creating a brief point of absolute darkness that seemed to devour light itself. When the effect cleared, the space where the vessel had been was completely empty, not just of the ship, but of everything. No debris, no energy signatures, not even background radiation. It was a perfect sphere of absolute nothingness. "One target down," Sarah reported, hardly believing it herself. "The lead vessel has been destroyed." But even as celebration began to spread through the combined fleet, the remaining Devourer vessels were adapting. Their reality fields began to shift and change, becoming more complex and harder to target. Worse, they were accelerating toward Earth, no longer content to engage the defensive fleet at long range. "They're making a run for the planet," Admiral Harrison observed. "All units, intercept course. We cannot allow them to reach Earth." What followed was the most desperate space battle in human history. Ships from 2 species that had been bitter enemies worked together with the precision of a single organism, their movements coordinated by the shared understanding that failure meant not just death but complete erasure from existence. Sarah found herself in the thick of the action, her stealth ship darting between the larger vessels to deliver targeting data and coordinate attacks. The alien technology that comprised her vessel responded to her thoughts with increasing fluidity, as if the ship itself understood the desperate nature of their situation. "Blackbird 1, this is the Vorthan cruiser Shartok. We are preparing to ram the nearest Devourer vessel. Can you provide targeting data for maximum effect?" Sarah checked her sensors and felt her heart sink. The Vorthan cruiser was one of their largest vessels, home to nearly 10,000 crew members. A ramming attack would be suicide, but it might provide the momentary disruption needed to break through the reality field. "Shartok, targeting data transmitted. Impact point 74 Mark 18 will cause maximum disruption to their reality anchor." "Acknowledged, Blackbird 1. It has been an honor to fight alongside your species." Sarah watched as the massive bio-cruiser accelerated toward the Devourer vessel, its hull beginning to glow as the alien reality field interacted with its bioorganic armor. At the moment of impact, there was no explosion, no debris field. The Vorthan ship simply intersected with the enemy vessel and both ceased to exist, leaving behind another sphere of perfect nothingness. But the sacrifice had created an opening. The remaining Devourer vessels were now vulnerable, their reality fields destabilized by the loss of 2 anchor points. Admiral Harrison seized the opportunity immediately. "All units, full assault. Target the remaining vessels while their defenses are down." Quote, "The combined fleet poured everything they had into the space occupied by the remaining Devourers. Human quantum torpedoes mixed with Vorthan bioplasma, creating a storm of destruction that lit up the darkness between the planets. And this time, it was enough. One by one, the reality-warping vessels collapsed under the sustained assault, their impossible geometries folding in on themselves until nothing remained but empty space. The last Devourer vessel attempted to flee, its distortion field flickering as it tried to escape into hyperspace, but a final coordinated volley from both fleets caught it before it could vanish. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the quiet hum of ship systems and the static of long-range communications. Where moments before space had been filled with vessels that could unmake reality itself, now there was only the familiar darkness of normal space, lit by distant stars that had flickered back into existence as the reality distortions faded. All stations report status, Admiral Harrison's voice cut through the quiet sacchery. The casualty reports were sobering. Humanity had lost 8 vessels and nearly 3,000 personnel. The Vorthan fleet had suffered even heavier losses, with 12 ships destroyed, including the cruiser that had sacrificed itself to create the opening for victory. But they had won, somehow, against odds that should have been impossible. Major Chen, Fleet Commander Zarthon's voice came through the communication array. Your species continues to amaze us. Against an enemy that has consumed countless civilizations, you not only fought but emerged victorious. Sarah felt no triumph, only exhaustion and the weight of what they'd accomplished. We had help, she replied. This victory belongs to both our species. Perhaps. But it was human determination that held the line when all seemed lost. Your people's refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds made the difference. As the 2 fleets began the process of recovering their wounded and assessing damage, Sarah found herself thinking about the broader implications of what had happened. The Devourers had been stopped, but Zarton had made it clear that this was only a scouting force. The real threat was still out there, consuming galaxies as it moved toward their local stellar group. But for now, Earth was safe. The normal people living their normal lives, including her former classmates who were probably just waking up and getting ready for work, would never know how close they'd come to complete erasure from existence. They would continue to worry about mortgages and relationships and all the small dramas that filled ordinary human existence, blissfully unaware that reality itself had been saved by the courage of people they would never meet. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself back in a place she'd never expected to see again, the hallway of Jefferson High School. The reunion had been extended due to scheduling conflicts, which was the official cover story for the fact that half the attendees had been too busy dealing with the aftermath of humanity's first alliance with an alien species to attend the social gathering. Maya was waiting for her by the trophy case, looking exactly the same as she had before Sarah's world had been turned upside down by cosmic threats and reality-warping entities. "So," Maya said as Sarah approached, "the news said there was some kind of military exercise that got extended, but you disappear for 3 weeks and come back looking like you've seen the end of the world." The official story was that the alliance with the Vorthans was related to deep space exploration and resource sharing. The existence of the Devourers remained classified at the highest levels, known only to a select few who had the security clearance and psychological profile to handle the truth. Let's just say the universe is a bigger and more dangerous place than most people realize, Sarah said finally, and sometimes the people who seem weak or broken turn out to be the ones who save everyone else. Maya studied her face, clearly sensing there was much more to the story. "Does this have anything to do with what you said to Jessica Morrison at the reunion, about fighting things that would make our worst nightmares look like bedtime stories?" Before Sarah could answer, a familiar voice interrupted them. Well, look who's back. Did you get tired of playing soldier in space?" Jessica Morrison stood behind them, but something was different about her. The cruel confidence that had defined her in high school was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. Word had gotten around about Sarah's mysterious military service and the respect she'd earned from people Jessica had always considered more important than herself. "Hello, Jessica," Sarah said calmly, turning to face her old tormentor. "I heard you got some kind of medal or something. For bravery or whatever." Jessica's voice carried a note that might have been envy or resentment. Must be nice, getting recognition for doing your job. Sarah thought about the Terran Cross of Valor sitting in a classified storage facility, about the commendation for saving Earth from complete erasure that she could never publicly acknowledge. But more than that, she thought about the Vorthan crew members who had sacrificed themselves to protect a species they'd once tried to conquer, about the human destroyer captains who had flown into certain death to buy time for others to escape. "You know what, Jessica?" Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced the impossible and won. "You're right. Recognition is nice, but the real reward is knowing that when it mattered most, when everything was on the line, I didn't run away. I didn't hide. I stood up and fought for something bigger than myself. She stepped closer, and Jessica instinctively backed away from the controlled intensity in Sarah's eyes. You spent our entire school career trying to make me feel worthless, trying to convince me that I was weak and pathetic and didn't deserve to exist. And maybe, for a while, I believed you. But you know what I learned? The people who try to tear others down are usually the ones who are most afraid of what they might accomplish if they were allowed to reach their potential. Jessica's face had gone pale, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Around them, other reunion attendees had stopped their conversations to watch, sensing the confrontation that was finally happening. I'm not angry with you anymore, Sarah continued. I'm actually grateful, because if you hadn't made me feel so powerless, I might never have found the strength to face real powerlessness. If you hadn't taught me what it felt like to be afraid, I might never have learned how to be brave. She turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. The scared little girl you used to pick on grew up to save the world, Jessica. I hope you find something that makes your own life feel that meaningful. As she walked away with Maya beside her, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she'd carried since adolescence. The scared teenager who had once hidden in bathroom stalls was finally truly gone, replaced by someone who understood that real strength came not from never being afraid, but from acting with courage despite that fear. Outside, the sun was shining on a world that had no idea how close it had come to never existing at all. People went about their daily lives, facing their ordinary challenges with the same determination that had somehow impossibly been enough to hold back the darkness between the stars. And somewhere in space, human and Vorthan vessels continued to patrol together, watching for signs of the greater threat that was still out there. The war against the Devourers was far from over, but humanity had proven something important. They belonged in that fight. Not as victims, but as warriors who refused to surrender even when faced with the impossible. The girl who had once been bullied for being different had grown up to be the catalyst for an alliance that might one day save the universe. It was a thought that would have made her teenage self laugh with disbelief, but the woman she'd become found it oddly fitting. Sometimes the most important battles were fought by the people who never sought them, and the greatest victories belonged to those who had learned to find strength in their own breaking. As Sarah Chen walked away from Jefferson High School for what she knew would be the last time, she carried with her not just the memories of who she'd been, but the knowledge of who she'd become. And in the end, that made all the difference.